So we are talking about the movie 2047 Virtual Reality, which is going to be out in June 2017 here in the UK. But you may know it at its American name, Virtual Revolution, which was written and directed by Guy Roger Duvert. Now, this was a little bit of a surprise, this film, because I enjoyed this film quite a bit. But what it's about. So this is actually a cyberpunk movie. I guess you can describe it as a cross between The Matrix and Blade Runner, but also it reminds me a lot of the kind of the B movie that you may not have heard of called Mind Warp, which starred Bruce Campbell. And this takes place in the near future, basically, and we're told at the beginning of the film there is this kind of revolution in technology, but basically all it is that the majority of the planet, 75% of the people, spend literally all of their lives plugged into this kind of virtual world, basically, a la The Matrix. But of their own accord, this is basically one big sort of giant game that people just kind of live their life on, and their life expectancy is only around 40. And, you get plugged in and that's it, basically. Your body sort of wastes away. But there are a small amount of people that choose to either live completely outside of it or what's known as hybrids, where you kind of go in on an occasion. Now, in this particular world, there is kind of three main forces. You have the corporations, you have the government, and what they call the necromancers, which is the kind of almost the terrorists type. And we focus on I best say a shadow operative is called Nash. And he basically is a kind of like a private eye, and he is hired by a corporation to investigate a terrorist attack on basically players, killing them in their kind of sleep. And as we uncover this kind of like this conspiracy, there may be different factions involved. We have these three different sides, all have their own agenda, and Nash is kind of pulled from pillar to post, plus he has his own personal agenda. Now, the film weaves basically between the real kind of futuristic world, which looks very much like a kind of cyberpunk, Shadowrun, Blade Runner-esque kind of landscape. And he kind of dips in and out of these kind of virtual worlds. It in a way reminds me a little bit of the movie Sucker Punch in that respect, because you kind of go into these worlds. Some of them are kind of fancy worlds, some of them are kind of like futuristic worlds, but they're kind of very well realised, and they kind of make sense to a certain degree, rather than kind of Sucker Punch, which was a just mess. Anyway, that's all I'm going to say in the plot, and I feel I've said quite a bit already. So what is this film like? I have got to say, I was so impressed with this film. This film is a visual masterpiece. For the budget, I was so impressed. I mean, the production value of this film is so good. It really does look like they've spent 90% of the film's budget here on the visual effects and the world building. It's absolutely brilliant. I've got to say, I was so impressed. Now, it doesn't really have any kind of big name actors here, but I feel maybe its downfall to a certain degree, which I'll come on to. But visual wise, it's so spectacular, and even when we see these kind of the shorter sequences where we kind of go into these kind of virtual reality kind of worlds, and we see like a big robot and they're fighting this and stuff, it looks great. There's absolutely special effects here for a kind of a straight to video movie. So impressive, so impressive. And I've got to say, they all look kind of like quite different as well. And I really love the kind of the used kind of worn look of the kind of the real world, this kind of cyberpunk aesthetic. And we have all these kind of like people living in these kind of dingy kind of environments, but they have this kind of high-tech stuff kind of around them. I thought it was fantastic. And the actual story itself, although somewhat convoluted, is pretty interesting. And I like the fact that it's not quite clear-cut. When we come to the end of this film, it's left with somewhat of an ambiguous end, but it's done very well. So I really enjoyed the kind of the way this story flows, and presents you with basically different sides, three different sides of the kind of the same story. So it was somewhat of an intelligent film with fantastic visuals that will blow your mind if you are a kind of a cyberpunk fan. Now, onto any negatives. I've got to say, maybe there were some problems I had with the writing. First and foremost, the main character of Nash. Now, he's basically played by a guy called Mike Dopud. You've seen him a couple of times in some TV stuff. And I've got to say, I felt as leading man, he was a little weak. Part of it, I feel, was due to the performance. Part of it, I feel, was due to the writing. He's written to be quite reactive. rather than proactive. So he's kind of ends up just kind of being pinballed around from pillar to post a little bit. It doesn't seem to really sort of take charge of the situation. And I thought the guy's performance, although it wasn't bad, it wasn't really kind of leading man status, if that makes sense. Now, the interesting thing here is the same character is actually played by two or three different people. When he kind of goes into these kind of realities, basically, he'll take on a different avatar, and therefore it's the same character, but they'll look different, if that makes sense. So I felt the main character was a little weak. And secondly, again, what to do with the writing, sometimes the story gets a little convoluted, and then sometimes you think, man, that was kind of quite basic in times. There is a couple of instances where we have scenes that are in the kind of the real world involving this hacker, and I just thought he's kind of talking to the Interpol, which is the kind of the government, basically. And I was thinking, there's got to be something more to that. And no, it was just, that seemed really kind of like a rudimentary conversation, if that makes sense. So there was some issues with the writing, but overall, if you are a science fiction fan and you like a dystopian future, you like your cyberpunks, you will love this film. This is an absolutely visual treat. You're going to love it. Go check it out. It's a brilliant film. Definitely still has its foot in the kind of the B-movie genre, I would say. It doesn't quite kind of poke its head out in the kind of mainstream culture, I would say, but definitely worth checking out if you're a sci-fi fan. Visually, it's absolutely brilliant. 7 out of 10 for me. Kind of love this one. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me comments, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.